Here's a subject I wanted to talk about for a few minutes that I've mentioned on my Facebook and my Instagram, and that is how the monopolies of the early 1900s financed, controlled the Bolshevism, communism, socialism, the isms, the collectivist groups, as well as controlled capitalism, or what they call capitalism. It was more like a corporatism type thing, a crony capitalism, or a just a kind of a protectionist racket. Carroll Quigley says in here, the American Communist Party was partly financed by J.P. Morgan and Company. J.P. Morgan and his associates financed the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, conservative groups, liberal organizations, communist groups, and anti-communist organizations. And you may be familiar with the book None Dare Call It Conspiracy by the author Gary Allen, who also wrote a book called The Rockefeller File, which also has a great bit of knowledge in there about the early 1900s and how it was basically taken over by the monopolies. He says in here, if you wish to control commerce, banking, transportation, and natural resources on a national level, you must control the federal government. If you and your clique wish to establish worldwide monopolies, you must control a world government. The Rockefellers are not humanitarians. They are power-seeking Machiavellans. They are using their phony philanthropy as a guise for seizing power on a magnitude that would make old John D. Sr. proud. Let's see here. All right, sorry about that. We have another excerpt from Antony C. Sutton, who has also done probably the preeminent author on this subject. He says here, John D. Rockefeller and his 19th century fellow monopolists were convinced of one absolute truth, that no great monetary wealth could be accumulated under impartial rules of a competitive laissez-faire society. The only sure road to acquisition of massive wealth was a monopoly. Drive out your competitors, reduce competition, eliminate laissez-faire, and above all, get state protection for your industry through compliant politicians and government regulation. And I talk about the over-regulation all the time, how the big companies are in bed with our representatives and have them write these over-regulatory laws that the small guy cannot compete with. Okay, he says here, this last avenue yields a legal monopoly, and a legal monopoly always leads to wealth. The difference between a corporate state monopoly and a socialist state monopoly is essentially only the identity of the group controlling the power structure. The essence of socialism is monopoly, control by the state. Success for the Rockefeller gambit has depended particularly on focusing public attention upon largely irrelevant and superficial historical creations, such as the myth of a struggle between capitalists and communists, and a careful cultivation of political forces by big business. We call this phenomenon of corporate legal monopoly market control acquired by using political influence by the name of corporate socialism. We call the phenomenon of corporate legal monopoly market control acquired by using political influence by the name of corporate socialism. Just reading that again. Corporate socialism is intimately related to the making of society, and it makes it work for the few. It says here, James Perloff, who wrote a great book on the Council on Foreign Relations, also has just a little excerpt here to say about this. Communism and socialism are themselves forms of a monopoly. The only difference is that in this case, the monopoly is operated by the government. But what if an international banker, through loans to the state, manipulation of a central bank, campaign contributions, or bribes, is able to achieve dominion over a government? In that case, he would find socialism welcome, for it would serve him as an instrument to control society. Again, that was James Perloff. And Gary Allen also says, to the Rockefellers, socialism is not a system for redistributing wealth, especially not for redistributing their wealth, but a system to control people and competitors. Socialism puts power in the hands of government, and since the Rockefellers control the government control means Rockefeller control. You may not have known this, but you can be for sure they do. And that is so true. If you look at the if you look at the power of the Rockefellers, and David in particular, who's passed on, but they still have great wealth and power, he established several groups to kind of control commerce and control policy. Of course, he was a director of the Council on Foreign Relations for a long time. I think he was an honorary president, a lifetime president or something like that, I'd read. But he was also the head of the Council of the Americas and about 5 or 6 other ones, a part of the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, and all these big groups who have these very wealthy, businessmen and leaders of government in there. Antony C. Sutton also says, one barrier to mature understanding of recent history is the notion that all capitalists are the bitter and unswerving enemies of all Marxists and socialists. This erroneous idea originated with Karl Marx and was undoubtedly useful to his purposes. In fact, this idea is nonsense. There has been a continuing, albeit concealed, alliance between the international political monopolist capitalists and international revolutionary socialists to their mutual benefit. I mean, this is not a comfortable subject, One side hates hates private business. It's always the private businesses their fault. It's the industry's fault. But the other side, hates the government, and it's always the government's fault. And in reality, the large multinational and large corporations and central banks are in bed with governments, so much so that you can't tell either one apart hardly. So it's really both. Let's see here. Check this out. Former socialist ruler Benito Mussolini marched on Rome and established, with liberal help from the J.P. Morgan Company, the Italian corporate state whose organizational structure is distinctly reminiscent of Franklin Roosevelt's NRA. In the United States, glorification of Mussolini and his Italian achievements was promoted by the ever-present financiers. That's Thomas Lamont. Thomas Lamont, Otto Kahn, and others. Those guys were the financiers. That was also Antony Sutton. And I'll read this one last thing to kind of give you an idea. Carroll Quigley also says in here, there does exist and has existed for a generation an international Anglophile network which operates to some extent in the way that the radical right believes communists act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the Round Table Groups, has no aversion to cooperating with communists or any other groups, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for over 20 years, and it was permitted for me for 2 years to be inside and examine their papers and their record. Just unbelievable, man. Unbelievable. I said I wasn't going to read anything else, but I'm going to finish it with this. This is also Antony Sutton, and this is from his book, The Best Enemy Money Can Buy. All right. With mountains of documentation, mostly from the government and corporate sources, it shows that Soviet military technology is heavily dependent upon U.S. and Allied gifts, peaceful trade, and exchange of programs. We've built for, sold or traded or given outright to the communists everything from copper wiring and military trucks to tank technology, missile guidance technology, computers, even the space shuttle. Peaceful trade is a myth. To the Soviets, all trade is strategic. This paradox is that we spend $300 billion a year on defense against an enemy we created and continue to keep in business. The deaf, mute, blind men, as Lenin called them, are the multinational businessmen who see no further than the next contract, who have their plants defended by Marxist troops in Angola, who knowingly sell technology that comes back to kill and maim Americans. All right? So, there, I stumbled through that. I can't read live for crap, but I hope this gives you an idea of our history with the communists and the socialists. And to further do your own research, I highly recommend the Antony C. Sutton books, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler and Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, The Best Enemies Money Can Buy, and also Gary Allen's The Rockefeller File and None Dare Call It Conspiracy. These guys do a great job of detailing all that, as well as the Carroll Quigley book, Tragedy and Hope, and the Anglo-American Establishment. Both of those books, um, you know, you can find a lot of information in those books, and it really kind of gives you an idea of what history really is